Good afternoon. My name is Tess Taylor, and I'm a specialist in the Community Education Department at MDA. We're thrilled to have you join us for day 2 of our Equipment and Assistive Technology series. This learning series is part of our larger MDA Community Education program, which focuses on bringing the neuromuscular disease community together around education and resources. Be sure to visit the Community Education section on mda.org for updates on upcoming events. For nearly 75 years, MDA has led the way in funding research to accelerate the development of new treatments, expanding access to care and clinical trials through the MDA Care Center network, and advocating for access and inclusion for the neuromuscular disease community. Now it is my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Anne Hegberg. As an occupational therapist, Anne has 36 years of specialization in driver rehabilitation. The first 33 years at a rehabilitation hospital and the past 3 years in private practice. Throughout the years, Anne has worked with numerous clients with limited motor function, including those with all types of muscular dystrophies. Currently, Anne primarily works with clients requiring a wheelchair-modified vehicle from low-tech to high-tech driving equipment. She has presented locally, nationally, and internationally regarding all aspects of driver rehabilitation. Hi, Anne. Thank you so much for being here today. I'll now turn the time over to you.
Welcome, everybody. Like Tess said, I do have many years of experience in driver's rehab. Excuse me. I do have a bit of some allergy stuff going on, so please forgive the coughing occasionally. The big thing with the driving, it's not only driving, but it's also community mobility, both in and out of the wheelchair, safe transportation. So we want to look at the vehicle and the wheelchair, the client, whether they're a driver or passenger, or they're a passenger who's going to become a driver with driver preparedness and driver rehabilitation. For children, what we want to look at is that they're safe travel all the time, anyone transporting the child. So you don't want to assume that just because someone transports a child in a wheelchair that they're doing it correctly. This is an example of unsecured wheelchairs on the left, and on the right, this is an unsecured passenger. And this comes from the University of Michigan Safe Traveler videos, and there's at the end there is a resource for that. These are crashes at only 30 miles per hour. So you can imagine at a faster speed, not the speaker, okay. So this is travelsafer.org, and the first step is to start with the right equipment, and that means a crash-tested wheelchair which has the places to put the hooks for the lockdowns. You can see there is 4 straps that strap down the wheelchair for securement, and then there's also a strap for the driver, a lap and shoulder belt, just like anybody else who is sitting in a motor vehicle. WC-19 is a voluntary crash test of a wheelchair, and it is the 30 miles per hour sled test of the wheelchair. Both power and manual chairs are tested. And then WC-20 is testing the seating systems. And it's best to use WC-20 with WC-19. Securing the wheelchair can be with manual tie downs. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with those. The 4 straps that attach, and then it also could be with a docking system, also called a wheelchair tie-down occupant restraint system. The pin goes on the bottom of the wheelchair with the bracket. The bracket does weigh 10 to 12 pounds, so it doesn't increase the weight of the wheelchair, especially if it's a manual chair. That can be an issue. When not all wheelchairs can be secured in a power lockdown, the most common lockdown systems out there are Easy Lock and Q-Lock, and there are the websites, and with the websites you can type in your wheelchair and they will tell you if there is a bracket for it, if it can be used in the driver position or not. This is an example of them in a couple of vans. So on the left we have the Q-Lock, and then ahead of that, that little, I don't know, star-shaped thing is a front stabilizer. And the front stabilizer is needed when the person is going to be driving from the chair to prevent tipping back with a quick takeoff or rotating either left or right. On the right side of the screen is an integrated lockdown front stabilizer, so it's a little bit lower profile. That does not work on all chairs though. And again, with the bracket list, it will say which lockdown is compatible. The 4-point wheelchair securement, it is less expensive. You can use it with multiple wheelchairs in multiple positions. So the school bus and other commercial vehicles, that's what they're going to have. The negatives is a wheelchair user cannot use it independently. It can be difficult to use correctly. And what happens a lot of times, and I'm sure there's those of you listening, know that a lot of times on short trips, maybe you don't use all 4 straps because it's a hassle and it's cold outside and the floor is wet. And so it's a short trip, so we maybe use all the straps. The docking systems, they can be done independently by a wheelchair user. So even if the person's not a driver, I recommend it just so that the person in the wheelchair user is responsible for their own safety. So if they're going out with friends, that they're each time they're using that docking station and it's securing the wheelchair. It's easier to use, which increases the frequency of use. It is required for a wheelchair driver, and it's easier for the caregiver to use also. The negative is it's more expensive. It is specific for one user and one in a wheelchair and one specific vehicle. So, okay, I see the no time to take notes. I'll slow down. So the negative is that it's only for one user and it's only in a specific vehicle. So if a person goes back and forth between a couple different wheelchairs, then you would have to have a bracket on each. In general, you're not going to be able to switch wheelchairs for driving. The way the systems are set up is for a specific wheelchair in the driver position. Sometimes people want to use wheelchair A, sometimes a wheelchair B other times, but very seldomly are you able to switch around between wheelchairs. The other negative is the locking pin that goes into the base becomes the lowest point of the wheelchair. And unfortunately, that does catch thresholds. It also, if you're going over grass, garden hoses, branches, things like that, it takes a while to get used to. So far, the industry hasn't figured out a better way that's consistently able to use. The third step then is to protect the rider. So we have the wheelchair secured. We have the wheelchair secured now, just like if you're sitting in a car without a wheelchair, you need to secure the rider with a lap and shoulder belt. You want to make sure that it goes over the hips, so it's over the skeletal parts of the body, so not in front of the wheelchair arms, because with that, you could easily slide underneath. So vehicle and wheelchair considerations. It's a combination, it's a triad. You have to have the right client in the right wheelchair with the right vehicle. So that's what we look at the beginning of the process. So wheelchair choice. You want to consider long-range goals when obtaining a wheelchair. I've seen people in very lightweight wheelchairs that are not going to be compatible with driving. The back may be very low, that only comes up mid-back. The person might not be able to get up a ramp in the manual wheelchair. And that's fine if they're going to get assistance up the ramp, but not if they're going to be an independent driver. Is this the wheelchair that the child or teenager will have when they're driving age? The chair they get when they're 12, 13 years old is probably the one they're going to have when they start to drive. If that's the case, we want to make sure that that chair is going to be able to be compatible with the docking station, the lockdown. If they're transferring, can they store the wheelchair independently? We'll show a couple pictures of different transfer scenarios because it's not just about getting into the driver's seat, but it's also storing the wheelchair independently. And then I know I kind of really say this a lot, but if you're going to drive from the wheelchair, make sure it's compatible with the lockdown. And don't assume that it is just because it's a power chair. And don't assume because the wheelchair modifier, the wheelchair place tells you, oh yeah, it's compatible. Go on the manufacturer of the lockdown and find out for sure if it's going to be compatible. Vehicle choice. So the age of the wheelchair user is going to play a key. If the family's getting a vehicle when the person is 14, 15 years old, that's probably the one they're going to have if that person has potential for driving. If it's only going to be used for transport, then that's a different scenario. Sitting height and weight, the interior of the different vehicles is different. And so you have to make sure that the wheelchair user sitting height is going to be the one in the vehicle you pick. And then passenger capacity. When they lower the floors in the minivans, they take out the middle seat. So you lose the seating there. Also, depending on the weight, they may block out one of the seats in the third row. And we'll give you some resources on that. You don't have to remember that. Just know that it does matter as far as the size of the wheelchair user and also the size of the interior of the vehicle. Definitely recommend you do not purchase a vehicle until guided by a professional. The professional to talk to is either a NMETA certified dealer, and again, later on I'll give you that contact, or a certified driver rehab specialist such as myself. We want to make sure that if you buy a vehicle that it's going to be able to be used for 5 to 10 years. So we're looking where the person is going to be as far as transport, driving, progression of the disease. So we want to make sure that the vehicle's right, and then don't purchase any equipment until evaluated. I've had some real sad stories of people who have bought used equipment, but by the time they have to get the equipment recertified and the training, they really would have been better off consulting the therapist, the driver rehab specialist first. Not everybody needs a joystick van, nor can not everybody use a joystick van. So what you're dealing with here is who you're going to be working with. OEM is the original equipment manufacturer. So that's Toyota, Chrysler, Chevrolet, Honda. They are the big guns that make all the what we call the chassis. And then you have those who make it wheelchair accessible. Braun Ability and Vantage, or also known as VMI, are the two that are the largest out there. I'd say Braun Ability is kind of the big gorilla, but they're the big gorilla because they've been around, and generally their equipment has good reviews. You can check on NMETA.org, and they have safety reviewed vehicles. If you go to NMETA.org and click on consumer, I forget however they say it exactly, and I lost my notes on it. So consumer resources, safety reviewed vehicles, and they will say by year and manufacturer what has been safety reviewed. The last at the top is the person that you are going to be dealing with, the local mobility equipment dealer. And that's the guy who's going to put in, OEM is original equipment manufacturer. So the mobility equipment dealer is the one that's going to install the adaptive equipment for the individual user. If it's a transport vehicle, they'll install the securement systems, either manual or automatic tie downs, transfer seats, and adaptive driving equipment as recommended by the certified driver rehab specialist. The National Mobility Equipment Dealers Association, NMETA, advocates for people needing accessible vehicles. They set the standards for their dealers. They have to be a NMETA dealer, you have to have certain things. You have to have 24-hour roadside emergency services. You have to have an accessible bathroom. You have to abide by the list of safety reviewed vehicles. There's a mediation process so that if there's a problem, there's a mediation committee that can work with both the end user, the consumer, and the mobility dealer. The other organization is the AIDED, which is the Association for Driver Rehab Specialists. And those are people like myself who are therapists that work in driver rehab. There are standards set for credentialing CDRSs, but not all programs are the same. Our program, for instance, does low vision. We work with teens. We work with high-tech and low-tech vans. Not all programs do that, so it's real important when you're looking into a program to find out exactly what they have so you don't spend wasted time or money going to a program that's not going to meet your needs. There's a membership directory on the AIDED website, so you can plug in what state you're in, and then it will come up with who's a certified driver rehab specialist in that state. It used to be if I'm not sure the age range on the audience here, but I'm sure some of you remember that it used to be the E150 or E250 Ford that was the go-to vehicle for wheelchair accessibility. Ford stopped making that vehicle, and so it's very limited availability to have that with a lift. There are transit or sprinter vehicles that you see around, but a lot of those cannot be used for the wheelchair driver, but for transport, they're adequate. It gets real sticky because the NMETA and the wheelchair modifiers need to look at if you take out the driver's seat, what's underneath there as far as wiring and airbags and sensors. And so that's one of the problems they are having with some of the bigger vehicles. So a lot of you have seen the minivans around. So the minivans, for those of you who haven't seen it, you've got the driver's seat, or you have the passenger seat, or both seats that come out. The floor is lowered by anywhere from 10 to 14 inches, and then the middle seat's removed. There's a seat in the back. If you're going to be a driver, it's real important you get one that's going to be have power doors, an automatic ramp, a kneel feature so that the ramp angle is decreased, the removable seats. Not all modifications have those things. So it's real important that you find out ahead of time. I've had people who come in that bought something online and they thought because it had power doors, that meant it would be power everything, but maybe it doesn't have an automatic ramp, or it doesn't have a kneel feature, or they can do just what they call a center cut, where the driver seats and the passenger seat are not removable. So it's real important to look into the future to see what's going to work out best in the long run for you. So I strongly recommend checking out a mobility dealer, get in the vehicles, look around, see what's going to work for you. A companion van would not be for a driver. A kneel, because it does not have, it has a manual door and a ramp. It does not have a kneel, and what the kneel is it actually lowers the entire vehicle so that the angle of the ramp is decreased, and it makes it easier to go up and down the ramp. It is difficult, especially with the neuromuscular weakness, to use this either kind of vehicle in a manual chair. The rear entry minivan, if you look here, you can see the back area is lowered, but not the front area where the driver's seat is. So it's not wheelchair accessible. You can't drive from your wheelchair. For some people, backing a wheelchair out of the vehicle can be difficult because you're into the aisles of the parking lot, but it's a lot less likely to be blocked in when parking. So mostly it's used for transport vehicles, but I think if you've been in a wheelchair vehicle, you've seen that people can be real stupid with the yellow spaces. This is actually a picture I saw, or a picture I took down in Southern Illinois, where they took the parking cart and put it in the yellow stripes. That doesn't help the person in the wheelchair. So I actually advise people when you're in a wheelchair van and you're the driver to park so that you're blocking the yellow stripes, so no one can park next to you, kind of park at an angle. And in our state, that is legal. Trucks. A lot of folks, especially the young guys, sorry, young guys out there, don't want to drive the minivan, a mom's soccer van. Well, I get it, but on the top right, that's called an ATC van. It has the door kind of like Back to the Future that goes up. Then there is a ramp, or not a ramp, I'm sorry, a lift that comes out, and the wheelchair can go on the left and then goes up and into the vehicle, and then the door comes down. The problem, there's a lot of problems with it, but one of the biggest problems is that it can be set up for wheelchair driver or wheelchair passenger, but it cannot be set up for both. So if you're the wheelchair driver and you're sick and somebody else is going to drive the vehicle, you can't stay in your wheelchair and be a passenger. If you can transfer, the one on the bottom there has what's called a transfer seat, and that comes out of the driver area. It can also be put for a passenger in other vehicles for an easy transfer from a wheelchair into the vehicle. The person sits on the seat. There's a hoist for the wheelchair, and that can be used for both the power and a manual chair. The back of the truck lifts up, and then the wheelchair is stored, and the top goes down. As far as SUVs, there's been a couple different ones that have been on the market. Right now, the only one on the market that I know of that is crash tested is the Chevy Traverse by Broadability. With the Mita, they will have to put on a QAP label, and that's a good thing because the number down there tells you exactly what was put on. So 5 years down the road, I'm sorry, slow down, Anne. Sorry. Namita.org, Consumer Resources. They have, with the QAP labels, there is numbers on those, and those then 5 years down the line, I've called it to find out this person's not sure what kind of steering they have. Do they have regular steering or is it modified steering? But by using those numbers, we can get through and find out exactly what they had in that vehicle. Driver's readiness. So, students with disabilities often have no prior experience interacting with traffic. They're in the wheelchair or sitting in the back seat. They're short stature, and a lot of the teens now are on their telephones or paying attention to a movie or whatever, but they're not paying attention to driving. So one of the questions that was presented ahead of time is, what can I do with my teen to get them ready for driving? All the motorized activities help. Be it go-karts, lawn tractors, golf carts, anything moving through space at a faster speed than walking or wheelchair speed is going to help. So what we want to do is get the person in the right passenger position if that's available. So that means if it's a minivan that you have, take out that front passenger seat and let the teen ride up front so they can pay attention to what's going on in the driving environment. If you can get them into the regular driver's seat, if the person's able to transfer, that would be great. Might need a cushion under the student to get them up high enough. And the goal is 3 inches above the steering wheel. So that's good line of sight. And so they're not looking at the B pillar. So the B pillar, if you look at the picture there, in the red rectangle, that's the B pillar. So if they're sitting too far back, they can't turn and look at the driving environment. This increases the awareness of the driving. They're going to identify signs, signals, potential hazards, and ask questions of the driver. So what we want to do is get the student doing the visual and the cognitive part of driving without physically handling the vehicle. It also helps the parents know when that child is ready for driving. Are they able to attend to the driving environment for a half an hour, or do they get distracted? Do they want to engage in it, or are they later? It doesn't work if the student doesn't want to drive. I've had many cases where the student doesn't really care if they drive. And so then they're not going to push the parents to practice, and they're not going to do well. State laws and requirements vary greatly state to state. Some states allow driving starting at age 14. Driver education is required in some states. It's not required in others. Even the vision requirements are not the same in all states. Our state, Illinois, does provide it in the high schools. And because of that, then a lot of the high schools do pay for driver education, driver rehab. What to expect? This is our program, but most programs are very similar. We want to look at the student, talk to the parent. One of the big things we ask is the student able to stay home alone for 4 hours or more? What is their safety in the home, using within their motor ability, using the stove, doing laundry, taking care of a family pet? All those kinds of things, even though they're not directly related to driving, goes to the maturity of the student. If all the student wants to do is play video games, then that doesn't bode well. The driver evaluation itself looks at the clinical and behind the wheel. In the clinic, we look at vision. We look at vision, cognition, and motor function. And behind the wheel, we look at the same 3 things. We also do a client interview. The big thing there is the progression of the MD. As you know, it varies greatly depending on the type of MD. Thankfully, there's starting to be some drugs that help. It also depends on the individual person. So we have to look at all those kinds of things, what the person's goals is. If they're a previous driver, what kind of driver were they? Did they have a good record? I've had some folks with MD who can use their foot to gas and brake as long as the foot's in just the right position. They even have a little worn out heel mark from having the foot there. But if it gets out of position, then they have trouble. So we want to look at all this. We're going to look at, because driving is so much based on vision, we do a lot of vision assessments. And cognitive. 20 decisions that need to be made in less than a half a second to react. Now, I live in the Chicago area, so I think there's probably even more than 20 decisions that need to be made for every mile driven, because there's some crazy people out there. And that's the problem, is it's not just you being the driver, is you have to be able to interact with other drivers, and they don't always do what they should. Cognition, on the left side, I find that my clients, that's not a problem, because they're using, crazy drivers everywhere. My clients are using adaptive equipment, so their hands are busy. So they're not on the phone, they're not drinking, and they're not eating, and things like that. So that's a big plus. But we want to look, the frontal lobe of the brain, and the brain does not fully mature until age 25. So regardless of the type of MD, we still have people that are, immature, impulsive, problem solving, attention are all issues that we want to look at. We'll look at the range of motion. And this is what can be done without holding your breath and throwing your arm up over your head or hooking on the wheelchair to stabilize so that you can move the arm. We want it to be easy. So we have to look at the range, the strength, endurance, coordination, both gross motor and fine motor coordination. And behind the wheel, we look at everything from the time you enter the vehicle, how you operate all the driving equipment. Excuse me 1 second. So behind the wheel, and this is a real concern of mine, is there are therapists who do not start at low tech and go from there. I always start with low tech equipment and then go to higher tech equipment. Entering the vehicle, this is a gentleman who's going up the ramp. We live in Chicago, so even though it's a pretty warm day, I made him wear his winter jacket because I'm like, you have to be able to do it. And this is someone just entering via the ramp system with a power chair. Behind the wheel, we're going to look at all those visuals. Now, the first day that they're driving with adaptive equipment, we're probably not going to do a lot of high speeds or high volume driving. It's going to be in a parking lot, residential area, but we want to work on all these kinds of things. Cognition, as far as the ability to follow directions, to make decisions, to make quick decisions. And the other thing is to take, if we tell them something, that they follow the directions and they don't deny it. If we say you need to check your over your shoulder for a lane change, we don't want them saying, I already did and you didn't see it, and arguing. Okay, they have to be open for education. So driving controls, primary controls are steering, gas, and brake. They change speed or direction of the vehicle. Anything with the primary controls, you really need to have training and education with. Mechanical hand controls, there's many different types. They can be put on the left side, the right side, under the steering wheel, next to the steering wheel. They all push forward for brake. So you have to have good, strong elbow extension as well as shoulder flexion, because you have to be able to brake and then hold that brake, for instance, at a red light. The way the acceleration is could be a twist, it could be pull back the gas, it could be a rock. And there's many different varieties. So check them out, find a place that has a lot of different ones that you can try. Don't assume that you have to go high tech. As far as high tech, which unfortunately, most of the clients I see with muscular dystrophy or spinal muscular atrophy, many do require some level of high tech. There are different manufacturers out there, EMC, AVIT, Paravan, Joysteel, Weber, IDS, and DSI. The problem is that they're not everywhere. Joysteel is very limited, I believe down south in Florida. There's some folks who use it on the evaluation vehicle. This is Weber, which recently decided not to stay in the United States, but there are still some mobility equipment dealers who do have Weber and can work on Weber to support it. And that's what you want to know is, what does your local dealer install and support? If your dealer doesn't support Joysteel or Paravan or Weber, then you probably don't want to get one of those systems. It's also, what does the evaluator have? Because you're going to have to get trained on that system. And then this is Paravan. And this is Scott's system, which is mainly out in California. Been around for a long time. Not quite as sophisticated looking, but it works. And then this is EMC AVIT. It does have both primary and secondary controls. We'll talk about secondary controls in a second. And it has a network of mobility equipment dealers. So if you are in Illinois with your van and you have a problem when you're traveling to Massachusetts, you can find a dealer along the way that can work on your equipment. And that's not as true with the other systems. I probably do have a little prejudice for it just because that's the system I've been working with for the last probably 15 plus years. All the systems have different inputs. So this one is with the AVID system. They have a lever, the lever for the gas and brake. It has 4 inches of travel from full throttle to full brake, and then 2.4 to 5 pounds force is required, which is not a lot. It can be placed anywhere in the driving area. The steering wheel is 5 inches in diameter. We can put different interfaces on it. It only 0.2 pounds of force, so it's very, very easy. The downside is it's a 2-to-1 ratio of steering. So for every 1 turn of the regular steering wheel or OEM wheel, you have to turn the small wheel twice. The other negative is you have to steer it back after a turn. So you steer it twice to do your right turn, and then it does not come back on its own. You have to steer it back 2 times. This is a combination. This gentleman is using the lever for the gas and brake with what's called a tri-pin. He doesn't need to have grasp. He puts his hand between the 3 pins, and then he has reduced effort steering with the regular steering wheel when he's doing the steering. This one has the lever for the gas brake, and then he uses, it's a little hard to tell, but he uses a single axis joystick for steering. And there's another picture later of that. That only needs the 0.2 pounds of force and just under 4 inches of movement. The display then has the wake up button. It can have the lockdown release, the door ramp switch, kneel on off switch, as well as the park reverse ignition on the display. The single joystick dual axis. So you have gas and brake, forward and back, and then left and right. I'll say right now, I'm not a big fan of that. It's very sensitive. It needs a lot of training, and that's a last resort, in my opinion. I prefer splitting it up and having 2 single axis joysticks. So on the left, Kate's using a joystick for gas brake, and on the right, she's using a joystick for steering. The little switch on top of the joystick enables her to activate the secondary controls when the vehicle is in motion. So signal, dimmer, wiper, horn, cruise, all those things. It can be with a pin switch. It can be with a soft touch button that can be activated with an elbow, a head, a knee, wherever. And I put them all different places. Whatever's going to work for that person. And then these are controls that used when the vehicle is stopped. Ignition, gear shift, HVAC is heating, ventilating, and air conditioning, and radio, those kinds of things do not have to be accessed while you're in motion. The other factors are driving needs. Does the person have to drive for work? Do they drive for school? Drive as part of work? Insurance costs has gotten to be a real issue. The vehicle equipment can be in excess of $150,000. If you have a new young driver, the insurance can be very expensive. It's really, really imperative that you keep the insurance up of both the vehicle and the equipment, because otherwise, if you get in an accident or there's a fire or anything like that, the insurance company may cover the vehicle, but they won't cover the equipment. I always tell people to get it in writing. If you get a vehicle from the mobility dealer, have a bill of sale that specs out exactly what you have on the vehicle, because a lot of times insurance companies are like, oh yeah, we cover, hand controls, a couple $1,000. but they don't realize some of the high-tech equipment that's out there. Vehicle upkeep is necessary for safety and longevity. Every 6 to 12 months, you got to get it looked at. If you don't, you're going to run into problems, and it's going to cost a lot more than that. So it's not just getting the vehicle, getting funding to get the vehicle, but it's also then the aftermarket. So how much does a person really have to drive? If it's just to drive to get together with friends from high school, then maybe wait until the person's a little bit older. Funding. The biggest funding source I use is vocational rehabilitation. Each state has that. They call them different things. Ours is called Office of Rehab Services. Wisconsin, it's Return to Work. So there's a lot of different things it's called. They will not pay for what we call the chassis, which is the actual vehicle, but often will pay for some or all of the modifications to the vehicle to make it accessible, lowering the floor, putting the ramp in, as well as the driving controls. Also the evaluation and the training they will often pay for. Some of it is need-based, some of it's not. I tell people to always apply because I'm often surprised by people who do qualify and people who don't qualify. That's out of my control, but that's, I would not assume that you wouldn't qualify because you're, middle class. So definitely look into that. But it's also they want you to be working or going to school. They're not going to help out if you do not plan to have employment. As far as teens, some states help when they're still in high school. Our state doesn't generally help until the student is out of high school or 18 years old. My first thing. School districts in our area in Illinois, many of the school districts will pay for the evaluation and the training of a student, but they do not pay for any of the adaptive equipment or the vehicle. The PASS program with SSI is planned to achieve self-support, and that's a program that you can do set-aside money that's not, again, doesn't count against you, so that you can save up for something major like a van. There's also various organizations, churches, diagnostic specific agencies like CP, United Cerebral Palsy, or MS Society. In my experience, it's been that they help, but it's not a great deal, maybe a few thousand. The other one is crowdfunding. I've had several people who have gotten crowdfunding through GoFundMe or another crowdfunding source to get the vehicle. Make-A-Wish, however, does not do vehicles or modifications. I've had several students try to go that avenue. One thing is also that there is rebate programs through the car manufacturers. And again, that's for modifications. It's generally a couple $1,000s, which helps, but when you're talking 150,000, it's not going to pay for everything. Resources, of course, MDA.org, NMATA.org. With the safety reviewed vehicles, you can also check for a list of dealers, and they have a lot of good information for consumers. They spelled out the PASS program really well, I thought, on their consumer information. The Association for Driver Rehab Specialists, ADID.net, has information to contact driver rehab specialists in your areas and different programs. University of Michigan, the travelsafer.org. It has some really great videos, kind of scary actually, of crash tests on wheelchairs with and without lockdowns, and then the bracket list for docking systems. One thing I will say, if you're a person who's going to need high tech, is there are not a lot of programs that do high tech. Right now, I'm in Chicago area. I go throughout the whole state of Illinois. I go to Iowa, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Indiana to try to cover those areas that don't have access to high tech. So don't be surprised if there's not a driver rehab specialist in your area that deals with vans or deals with high tech. You may have to travel a little bit further or have them travel to you.